Do you notice
Very
anything
merry.
different? Yeah? Ho, ho, ho.
He wasn't supposed to become this big the Belfast-born boy who once dreamed of being heard, finally became one of Britain's most recognizable voices on television. But that's exactly what happened with Eamonn Holmes. For decades, he captured millions of viewers every morning, sharing everything from light-hearted chats to hard news with a charm that somehow felt both familiar and unshakably authoritative. From the beginning, there was something magnetic about Holmes. Born and raised in Northern Ireland, he started as a journalist with grit and determination, cutting his teeth in newsrooms long before he ever stood in front of a camera. That early grind, the long nights, the rushed deadlines, the sinking feeling of uncertainty shaped him into a broadcaster who could handle anything thrown his way. It wasn't just ability that set him apart. It was his presence, that unmistakable voice, quick wit, and the way he could make viewers feel like they were having a conversation with a friend in the room. And then came television. For a presenter, there's no bigger platform than a morning show that becomes part of people's daily routines, and Eamonn found his wit this morning. The iconic ITV program. He wasn't just another face on the screen. He and his future wife, Ruth Langsford, became the morning ritual for families across the UK. Week after week, their effortless banter and dynamic chemistry made TV feel personal. Intimate almost. They were the couple people woke up with. It wasn't luck that brought him there. At every twist and turn of his career, Holmes brought honesty and a knack for connection that audiences responded to. Viewers didn't just watch him deliver headlines, they laughed at his jokes, echoed his frustrations, and trusted his perspectives. That rare blend of relatability and professionalism is what took him from news desks to living rooms across the nation. And it didn't stop at morning TV. Holmes became a fixture not just on screens, but in headlines. With his career spanning decades that saw him work on everything from quiz shows to in-depth interviews on political and cultural issues. Even when controversies sparked public debate, like the moments he's been forced to apologize on air, the world couldn't look away. Holmes had become a public figure whose words and actions carried weight. For better or worse. For years, Eamonn and Ruth weren't just a TV presenting duo, they were Britain's golden couple, embodying the kind of partnership that felt timeless to the public. Their union wasn't just professional. It was personal, spanning decades together before marriage and culminating in what many thought would be lifelong companionship. But even stars that shine the brightest can face shadows. At the height of his career, Eamonn Holmes wasn't just famous, he was embedded in British culture. His voice became part of the national morning routine. His face a familiar comfort in millions of homes. Success didn't arrive overnight. But when it did, it arrived loudly. Primetime television slots, lucrative contracts, industry respect, and the kind of recognition most broadcasters only dream of. Eamonn had reached the summit. And standing beside him for much of that journey was Ruth Langsford. Together, they weren't simply presenters. They were a brand. Viewers watched them joke, disagree, tease each other, and occasionally roll their eyes in ways that felt genuinely unscripted. It made people believe what they were seeing was real. The chemistry was effortless. The affection seemed natural. In an industry known for fragile egos and short shelf lives, Eamonn and Ruth appeared solid, untouchable even. Behind the scenes, the rewards of that success were immense. Eamonn became one of the most recognizable and well-paid figures in daytime television. Invitations poured in. Media attention followed him everywhere. Awards, red carpets, book deals, the high life came with all the trappings. For a man who had worked relentlessly from regional journalism to national stardom, this was the payoff. But fame has a strange way of blurring lines. As their on-screen popularity grew, so did the pressure to maintain the image. Viewers didn't just want presenters, they wanted a perfect couple. The public invested emotionally in their marriage, their family, their story. Any crack, no matter how small, risked becoming headline news. Smiles had to stay polished. Arguments had to stay private. Problems had to be pushed aside for the sake of the cameras. And there were signs, subtle at first, that the weight of it all was starting to take a toll. Eamonn's health struggles became increasingly visible. Chronic pain, mobility issues, and surgeries quietly crept into his life. Even as he continued showing up on screen, Ruth often appeared supportive, but the dynamic viewers saw began to shift. The easy laughter wasn't always there. Moments of tension slipped through. Social media users noticed. Tabloids speculated. At the same time, career paths began to diverge. Eamonn moved into more outspoken territory, embracing controversial commentary, and later joining GB News, a move that polarized audiences. Ruth, by contrast, maintained a softer, more traditional daytime television presence. Slowly, the once unified brand started to look separate. Still, to the outside world, they were thriving, successful, secure, together. But fame has a way of amplifying what already exists, especially cracks that were never meant to be seen. And soon, those cracks would widen under the harshest spotlight yet. From the outside, it looked like a power couple simply evolving with time. But behind the polished smiles and rehearsed small talk, pressure was building, and it was becoming harder to hide. Eamonn Holmes had never been a man to stay quiet. That blunt honesty, once seen as refreshing, slowly became a liability in a media landscape growing less forgiving by the day. His outspoken opinions began to spark backlash, particularly after his move to GB News. Headlines shifted in tone. Where once they praised his experience, now they questioned his judgment. Apologies followed. Public debates erupted. And with every controversy, the spotlight burned hotter. Ruth Langsford, meanwhile, stayed largely silent. That silence spoke volumes. As Eamonn leaned into opinionated broadcasting, Ruth appeared to step back not just professionally, but emotionally in the public eye. Fans began to notice the distance. Interviews that once featured shared anecdotes became carefully neutral. Public appearances together grew rare. Even their social media presence, once warm and interconnected, felt noticeably restrained. Then came the health struggles. Eamonn's physical condition worsened, affecting his mobility and independence. Chronic pain doesn't just test the body. It tests relationships, caregiving, frustration, exhaustion. These are pressures few marriages are prepared for under normal circumstances. Add fame, constant scrutiny, and a 24-hour news cycle, and the strain multiplies. Insiders began whispering that the balance had shifted, that Ruth had quietly taken on more responsibility emotionally and practically, while continuing her own demanding career. Meanwhile, Eamonn, once the dominant on-screen force, found himself vulnerable in ways the public had never seen before. And vulnerability can be dangerous when pride is involved. Reports suggested disagreements behind closed doors. Not dramatic blow-ups, but slow-burning tension, the kind that erodes connection over time. Different priorities, different coping mechanisms, different futures being imagined in silence. What made it worse was the expectation. For decades, audiences believed in them. They represented stability in an unstable industry. Admitting things weren't perfect felt almost like betrayal, not just to fans, but to the identity they had built together. So they carried on, smiled through it, showed up, played their parts, until they couldn't. When rumors of a split began circulating, neither rushed to shut them down. No joint statements, no reassuring appearances, just distance. And in the absence of clarity, speculation exploded. And then, at 66, Eamonn Holmes finally decided to speak. What he said and what he didn't say would change everything. When Eamonn Holmes finally broke his silence, people expected clarity. What they got instead was something far more unsettling. There was no dramatic confession, no explosive accusation, just carefully chosen words that felt heavy restrained, but unmistakably bruised. At 66, Eamonn didn't sound like a man chasing headlines. He sounded like someone who had lost control of a story he never wanted told. He spoke about change, about distance, about how life doesn't always go the way you expect, no matter how long you've been together. To some, it sounded reflective. To others, it sounded bitter. What stood out most was the absence of Ruth's voice in his narrative, not in anger, but in omission. That silence felt deliberate, and deliberate silence can sometimes say more than words ever could. Behind the scenes, reports suggested the split wasn't sudden, it was slow, painful, and deeply private. Years of strain had apparently taken their toll. Health issues, career divergence, emotional exhaustion. Two people growing in different directions while the world insisted they stay the same. For Eamonn, the fallout was immediate. Public sympathy was divided. Some rallied around him, pointing to his health battles and long service to broadcasting. Others accused him of playing the victim of subtly shifting blame without taking responsibility. Social media dissected every phrase, every pause, every interview clip. At an age when most people hope for peace, Eamonn found himself once again under judgment. Ruth, on the other hand, chose a different path. She didn't retaliate. She didn't explain. She didn't set the record straight. Instead, she focused on work, appearing composed, professional, and emotionally guarded. To many viewers, that restraint made her seem stronger, even dignified. To others, it raised questions. What wasn't she saying? And that's where things turned uncomfortable. Because reinvention doesn't always look like success. Sometimes, it looks like survival. Eamonn continued speaking, not constantly, but enough to suggest unresolved pain. His tone shifted from confidence to contemplation, from authority to uncertainty. The man who once commanded morning television now appeared caught between defending his past and redefining his future. Was this a fall from grace? Or was it the beginning of something else entirely, a late-life reckoning? Stripped of illusion, one thing was clear. The image of Britain's unshakable TV couple was gone. What replaced it was far more human, far more fragile, and far more complicated. And as the dust slowly settled, one final question lingered in the public's mind. What legacy would Eamonn Holmes leave behind, and what comes next when the cameras stop rolling? When the noise fades and the headlines move on, what remains is rarely the scandal, it's the story people choose to remember. And Eamonn Holmes' story is far more complicated than a single breakup or a painful public moment. For over 4 decades, Eamonn shaped British television. He informed, entertained, provoked, and connected. Few presenters can claim the level of longevity he achieved, or the trust he built with audiences across generations. He wasn't just a broadcaster, he was a fixture, a voice people woke up to, a presence that felt familiar, even comforting. But legacies aren't frozen in time. They evolve. The end of his marriage to Ruth Langsford didn't erase what they built together, but it did change how people look back on it. What once felt like a fairy tale partnership is now viewed through a more realistic lens. Not failure, but fragility. Not betrayal, but burnout. Two people carrying extraordinary pressure for far too long, until something finally gave way. There's also a quieter lesson here, one that many viewers recognized in themselves. Long marriages don't always end in explosions. Sometimes they end in exhaustion, in silence, in two people realizing they've been surviving more than living. That truth, uncomfortable as it is, made Eamonn and Ruth's story relatable in a way perfection never could. So what's next for Eamonn Holmes? At 66, reinvention looks different. It's not about chasing relevance, it's about redefining purpose. He's still broadcasting, still speaking, still refusing to disappear. But there's a noticeable shift in tone. Less certainty, More reflection. A man coming to terms with change, loss, and the cost of a life lived in public. For Ruth, the future appears steadier. She continues her career with quiet consistency, choosing privacy over performance. In many ways, her restraint became her statement. And maybe that's the final takeaway. Fame magnifies everything love. Success, pain, and endings. Eamonn Holmes' journey reminds us that behind every public figure is a private life we never fully see. That even the strongest images can crack. And that starting over doesn't always mean starting fresh. Sometimes, it just means starting honestly. The cameras may move on. The public may debate. But the story of Eamonn Holmes isn't just about a fall or a split. It's about a man facing the hardest transition of all, the one that happens when applause fades and reality finally speaks.